school, always wanted to sit in the back of the room, never up front. You know, and look at that, it's still, when we get older, we do the same thing. So my name's Rich Werner, and Laura Sibilia asked me to come and moderate this. She wasn't sure if there was gonna be 2 people coming or 100 people coming. So we got a pretty nice crowd. There is a sign-in sheet in the back. You're not required to sign in, but if you would like some more information or like to contact Laura, you can do that. She asked for your email. We also have, so we have Representative Laura Sibilia to kind of discuss the Vermont Climate Action Laws, focusing on the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Clean Heat Standards Act. Besides Laura, we have a really good panel of speakers and some neat people too. So I've always been impressed with our legislators, you know, going back to Phil Bartlett and Rick Hubie, because we always seem to get great people. We've had the lieutenant governor here, we've had the governor speak to us, we've had a lot of really high-ranking government officials, Vermont officials. So it's really nice. But we have Jared Duvall, who's the executive director of the Energy Action Network. He brought us a booklet, and he is going to unite over 200 organizations to advance Vermont's climate and energy goals. EAN focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions for the Global Warming Solutions Act and increases renewable energy uses as outlined by the Comprehensive Energy Plan. And Jared's going to provide an overview of the Vermont climate commitment and analyze our progress. He's got a little booklet. A lot of the stuff in the booklet he'll be showing in a slide. And the booklet on the back, he has his .org, so if you'd like to contact him after the event. And we also, very luckily, have a gentleman named Ed McNamara, who's not related to any other McNamaras in the state of Vermont, he told me, so don't blame him if you know another McNamara that gave a hard time over something. And he gets the chair of the Vermont Public Utility Commission, the PUC. That's kind of a cool name. And the PUC is a quasi-judicial agency in Vermont that regulates public utilities, including electricity, natural gas, telecommunications, and water services. So when you're mad about consolidated, this is the guy you want to call. But we're not here to talk about that tonight. PUC's responsibility includes approving rates, ensuring reliable service, and overseeing energy policies and infrastructure development, such as renewable energy projects and the implementation of state energy laws like the Clean Heat Standard. Ed will update us on the development of the Clean Heat Standard and explain the PUC's role in the legislative process. So what we're doing is, if there's an agenda out back, we're actually going to make a change to it already. If you'd like the agenda or like the booklet, they're on the table out there. We're going to do the welcome. Laura Sibilia is going to do a brief introduction, and then we're going to turn it over to Jared, who's going to explain what they're doing and give you an overview. He's got a nice slide presentation. Then we're going to go back to Laura to let you know why she supported and pushed forward the bills that she did. And then we're going to go to Ed, who's going to talk about his position. He says he's not going to be really long. And then what we're going to do is around 7 o'clock, a little after, we're going to have a question and answer session. But we are going to ask that you do state your name, what town you're from, just to give it some relevance to where your question's coming from. Obviously, things in Brattleboro are different than they are in Dover or Jamaica. We're also going to ask you to limit your comments or questions to 3 minutes. But what we will do is, if there's more time and there's only a few people that have questions, we'll go around, but we'll give everybody at least a chance to get one question in, and then we can go around and do it twice. And we're going to ask that you be respectful. You know, respect the 3 minutes. I will stand up when your 3 minutes are close to being up, and then we will get you your answer, and then we'll move on to the next person. I will write your name down, so if I hopefully don't forget anybody. I think I know almost everybody here. Are there any questions or comments or any thoughts? Did we miss anything, folks?
I just want to throw out one thing. There's for more information on this agenda. Second thing down is the PUC's website, specifically on this. So if you go home and think, oh, I wish I'd said that, that's the place to go and submit comments. So it's not like one and done. We're getting comments anytime. So just want to make sure folks are aware of that. Don't feel pressure that you got to put everything in today. This is a multi-month process.
And also, Jared's email is just below that, and Laura's email. Sometimes people don't like to speak in public, so you can always send Laura a private email or send an email to either one of these gentlemen in case you didn't want to ask your question in public. So if we're all good, I will introduce Laura Sibilia to give us a brief introduction.
Okay, well, I want to start by thanking Chair McNamara and Jared for taking time to drive down to Dover. They drove probably 2 hours to come down. You are an appointed public servant, so we appreciate you bringing your job here, but still, and the workday, thank you very much for coming here to speak to this group of folks. Jared, thank you very much for coming, bringing resources for folks. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Laura Sibilia. I am the representative for the Wing 2 district, which includes Dover, Wardsboro, Stratton, Jamaica, and Somerset. I have been elected 5 times and just finished my 10th year in the House. I used to represent a different district. This was my first year representing this district. I grew up I finished high school in Whitingham. I grew up here locally, and I grew up in poverty. So I know a lot of you are concerned about poverty and poor people. So am I. And the rural and poor experience is the one with which I use as a lens for a lot of the policy considerations that I make when I'm in the legislature. There's a lot of information out right now about the clean heat standard. There's a lot of agitation. It's election season about a lot of other policies. And because this is a complicated policy, because I think something in here is really necessary, it's important for us to move forward with because of climate change, it feels like it's really important to give people an opportunity to grapple a little bit more, bring some experts that can ask questions, and we can do it again. So I want to thank all of you for taking the time to come out tonight. I know some of you are angry about these policies or other policies, and I appreciate you making the time to come here. I am listening, and I know some of you just want to learn, and thank you, I'm listening. I know we have press. I know we have this meeting being recorded. I don't know if that will be publicly available or not.
Yes, it will be on YouTube.
And just a few housekeeping items. For those of you that haven't been here, there are bathrooms, both sides. The data that Jared's going to go through, a lot of it is captured in the 2023 annual report that his organization puts out. It's especially helpful, I think, because it really makes it so that it's digestible by just regular people. Grapple with some pretty technical information. There's an agenda, and my business cards are out there, as well as a sign-up sheet if you'd like to receive newsletters. So with that, thank you all. Jared, why don't you get us started with data, and then we'll talk about the policies.
Thank you, Representative Sibilia. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Really glad to be with you this evening. I just want to start by setting some context about energy, emissions, and the economic implications of both of those things. So I've got some slides here, and I'm going to try to go through those in about 20 minutes or so, and then look forward to the conversation and questions. So the first thing I want to just introduce is Energy Action Network. EAN is the nonprofit organization that I lead, and it also is it's really two things. It's a nonprofit organization and a network of members. The nonprofit organization primarily focuses on independent research and analysis to really help make sure that Vermont's energy and climate conversation is grounded in the latest and highest quality available information and analysis. We do that, as Representative Sibilia said, through our annual progress report for Vermont. Please take a copy, please take extra copies. That's my last box because our 2024 report is coming out in a month. So I don't need to take all those back with me. If you're interested or have friends or neighbors who would be interested in that. And then we also serve as a neutral facilitator for a diverse network of stakeholders who are working together to meet Vermont's energy and climate commitments. But this evening, I really want to just focus on what we know about where we stand on energy use in Vermont, Vermont's climate pollution, and what it means for Vermont consumers and Vermont's economy. So these are some pictures of our previous reports. The big one is our most current. Some of the context that I think is really important, as you all know too well, Ed and I know too well, living in Montpelier, which has been really hit hard as well, is that since 2011, Vermont has had 20 federally declared climate disasters, mostly due to 1 in 100 year, 1 in 1,000 year rainfall and flooding events that have caused significant damage. So much so that Vermont has had more climate-related disaster. We're the seventh most of any state in the country. And that's not per capita, that's of any state. And some of our counties, Washington County, for instance, is tied for second most federally declared disasters of any county in the entire United States. So climate change is not a future threat. It is here, and as many of us in Vermont know, impacting us all too severely. So this kind of outlines the path I want to take with this presentation. First is let's talk about energy, then emissions, then energy costs. First on energy use. So often when we talk about energy, it automatically goes to an electricity conversation. And electricity is just one of our kinds of energy use. And actually, it's compared to the energy we use to get around and to heat our homes and buildings, it's our smallest energy using sector. The vast majority of our energy use, of the climate pollution, and of the energy costs that Vermonters face are in the transportation and thermal sectors, not in the electricity sector. But this just helps compare them together, put context on where's most of the energy use, where's most of the emissions come from. Combined, transportation and heating are 70% of Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions. You might notice that that middle column on our emissions doesn't add up to 100%, because while our energy sectors are responsible for nearly 3/4 of our emissions, there's also emissions from agriculture, from industrial processes, from things that are not related to energy. And then in terms of what we pay, on average, most Vermonters are spending nearly half of their energy dollars on transportation, primarily gasoline, a little over 1/3 on heating, and about 20% on electricity. So let's dive in on energy use. This shows Vermont's total energy use as of 2022. Each of these pie charts are scaled to the size of energy use. So overall, about 119 trillion BTU of British thermal units of energy use in the state. You can see electricity on the far right is our least, is the lowest amount of energy use and the most renewable of all of our electricity sectors. 75% renewable, on its way to being 100% renewable by 2035 with the changes that were just approved in the revised renewable energy standard. But the other two energy sectors, transportation and thermal, much more energy use and much more fossil fuel intensive, as you see in the orange. So the orange is fossil fuel, the green is renewable energy. This is a breakdown of our thermal sector use. So I should pause here and say thermal sector really refers to heating and cooling. In Vermont, it's primarily heating, although increasingly we're seeing cooling with our warming summers in addition to our warming winters. And of our overall heating use, it's a real mix. About 1/4 is fuel oil, a little over 1/4 is fossil gas, also sometimes known as pipeline gas or natural gas, and about 20% is propane, and nearly 1/4 is wood, including cordwood, wood pellets. And this has actually been changing over time, which is really interesting. So we did a study on Vermont's changing heating sector a couple of months ago, and you can see that if you start in 2018, which is the first year that we could get data from the Vermont Department of Taxes, the use of fuel oil has actually declined by about 22% in the last 6 years. Propane use has actually increased. And so we get into the paper about why are we seeing increasing propane use and decreasing fuel oil use, and fossil gas has decreased by about 9%. A big factor here is Vermont's warming winters. The heating degree days are a measure of how much heating needs to happen on a given day away from a comfortable temperature. And we have seen since 1990, there's variation year to year in terms of how warm or cold our winters are, but in general, we're seeing this downward trend of fewer heating degree days because of warming winters, which is decreasing demand for heating fuels, regardless of what the fuel is. But that's not the entire story. At the same time that our winters are warming, more and more Vermonters are weatherizing their homes, they're moving from fossil heat to wood heat, or they are installing heat pumps or heat pump water heaters. And so it used to be the case that our fossil heating fuel sales moved hand in hand. The lines basically overlapped with how warm or cold the winter was. Colder winters, more fossil fuel use, warmer winters, less fossil fuel use. Those lines have started to break apart. They've started to become decoupled. And so what we're seeing is that fuel sales are decreasing even further than winters are warming because of the investments that are being made in how much people are weatherizing homes and moving especially to heat pumps, which has ramped up significantly in Vermont over the last 5 to 6, 7 years. All right, so that was the energy overview. I'm going a little bit deeper on the heating sector, the thermal sector, just because I imagine we'll talk about that with relation to the Affordable Heat Act and heat standard. But on to emissions. So in 2020, the Vermont legislature passed a law called the Global Warming Solutions Act. This followed a practice that most other New England states have also done, which is to set legal obligations around greenhouse gas pollution reduction, reducing climate pollution in line with science-based targets and the national commitment that the United States made as part of the Paris Agreement. And so you can see with those two lines here where what Vermont doing our part towards these science-based targets and national commitments means getting our climate pollution down to 2020 by 2025, by 2030. So we've been coming down since about 2015. There was a slight uptick in 2021, not post-pandemic, but as more people were driving again, especially. But we're still far away and not yet on track to meet these legal commitments that the state has made for us to do our part to reduce climate pollution here. I will note that there's different ways we can look at emissions. So Vermont, as the smallest state by population in New England and in the Northeast, has the lowest total emissions in New England. But if we look at our climate pollution per person, we actually have the second highest climate pollution per person of any state in New England, the third highest in the Northeast, and we of all the northeastern states have made the least progress towards that Paris Climate Agreement commitment. So this graph we produced with the Agency of Natural Resources information in their greenhouse gas inventory. They produce this every year. What are the greenhouse gas emissions from in Vermont? The darker colors here show our historical emissions by sector. So transportation, the largest in green, thermal sector, that's also known as residential, commercial, and industrial fuel use. That's all that fuel oil, propane, fossil gas, that's in the orange. And then you see the other sectors down below. So that's where we've come from. And then this is the trajectory to be on, again, to do our part towards these science-based national commitments of reducing emissions in line with the U.S. Paris commitment. Oops. Oh, I analyzed. This is the same data broken out by sector, so you can see what's happening over time with transportation emissions. It's actually been a fairly significant decline since 2005, about a 25% decline in transportation emissions. It did jump back up in 2021. Thermal sector emissions, the other sectors. What you see is that we're seeing declines in many sectors, but not yet at the scale and pace that we've committed to. In some other sectors, we're seeing increases. Here's another way to look at it. We often are talking about how much climate pollution is produced and how is it legally required to go down over time. But this is also really important to look at. This is all of the when we do that, all of the avoided emissions between 2021, and 2050. And meeting our legal requirements would then result in cumulatively avoiding over 100 million metric tons of greenhouse gas pollution and avoided social costs and damages, including paying extra for fossil fuel, and then avoided health and infrastructure damages of over $25 billion. This is a snapshot of our emissions by sector in the latest year for which we have data available, 2021. Transportation largest, thermal sector next largest. These are the two big elephants in the room, again, in terms of where most of our energy use is, where most of the climate pollution comes from, and where most of our energy costs are. This shows more information about fuel use in the thermal sector by building type. So most of the thermal fuel use in Vermont, the slight majority, is from homes. It's residential fuel use. A little over a third is commercial, and about 13% is industrial. So, this is why a big focus of the conversation is how can we help reduce energy use and costs in homes, because that's where so much of the energy use and costs are right now, is in the residential sector. Also important to focus on commercial and industrial, but this is the biggest opportunity in the thermal sector to help cut pollution and cut costs. In terms of what the amount of climate pollution that comes from different fuel sources, there are some really big differences. So, fuel oil, kerosene, propane, all very emissions intensive, carbon intensive. Vermont's electricity portfolio is the lowest emitting of any electricity portfolio in the United States, and it's going to get lower as we move towards 100% renewable. So when folks move from these really high emitting fuels, there's the possibility, as I'll get to move off of an economic roller coaster of prices swinging up and down, sometimes increasing $2 a gallon in a single season, onto a more price stable fuel. But that also is an opportunity to significantly reduce emissions by moving to the cleanest electricity portfolio of any state in the country when it comes to climate emissions. And this is that roller coaster I was talking about. This is probably hard to see, but anybody who pays fuel bills knows this by heart, this experience, that fuels like fuel oil, propane, kerosene, they are not only generally higher cost than other fuels, they're also incredibly price volatile. So fuel oil is in the kind of purplish color here, propane is in the gray, and in contrast, the cost of heating with wood pellets or wood chips, much lower, much more price stable. Heat pumps, the fuel, the electricity, much lower cost and more price stable. And so that's a really important consideration in terms of the cost, is what fuel are you using, what fuel might you look at instead, and what does that mean for your budget going forward. And this is really important because Vermonters, it really depends on your economic situation, how much energy is a burden for you. So for Vermonters in the lowest income group, who make less than 60% of area median income, $44,000 a year or less, the combined cost of electricity and home heating is generally taking up 19% of their total income in a year. Folks who earn more, they are actually using more energy, tend to have bigger houses, but since they make so much more money, the share of income that they're spending on energy is much lower. So folks who are above 100% of area median income, 3 to 4% of your annual income is spent on heating and electricity. But it's a much bigger burden and really important to focus on for Vermonters with lower incomes for whom this is a particularly painful status quo. And I think one of the things that's really important in terms of having a conversation about heating and its costs is looking at a comparison, not just of a price per gallon at a given point in time, But most of these energy systems that we put in, whether you buy a water heater, might last 15 years, give or take. You put in a new boiler or a furnace, maybe it's 20 or 25 years. Not just what is the point in time cost, but what is the lifetime cost of that equipment, its maintenance, its fuel. And so this is an example that we put together as an illustration using the latest data that was available from the technical reference manual, which Chair McNamara knows well. It is something that Efficiency Vermont or electric utilities use so that there's common agreement on good numbers. It is true that a new propane water heater costs less to install if you don't get an incentive than a heat pump water heater. You see that here. The orange line starting a little over $2,500, whereas a heat pump water heater would be more expensive to install. But because you're heating your water with that more price stable, lower cost electricity, the lifetime costs of a heat pump water heater in Vermont on average are between $2,500 and $6,500. That range is dependent on how much of an upfront incentive you get. It can depend on your utility territory, but there's really good incentives through Efficiency Vermont and others. Over the lifetime, 12 years, propane water heater expected to cost $9,500. So when we talk about cost, I think it's really important that we understand how costly and unaffordable the status quo is, and the opportunity, if done right, to help people move on to lower cost options. Oh, and then, as an aside, huge difference in emissions. That would be the lifetime amount of emissions from that propane water heater versus from the heat pump water heater using the cleanest electricity portfolio in the country. Another reason that this is possible, it's not just about electricity being a cleaner energy source than fossil fuels. It's also about the difference in the technology. So heating systems that we are used to primarily use combustion. We are burning things to generate heat. That's how boilers and furnaces work, whatever the fuel is. And they max out at a possible 100% efficiency. Oftentimes it's the high 80s or low 90s, the efficiency of turning that energy into heat through combustion. But heat pumps, for example, use a different technology. They're not generating heat, they're transferring heat from one place to another, which allows them to achieve efficiencies that are, sometimes 4 or 5 times greater than the combustion equipment. And it's the combined effect of those two things that can help allow significant savings. I think it's really important to say each individual situation is different. Depends on the size of your house, how it's laid out, is it open, how many rooms does it have, what's your current heating system, what are your options for how you switch. But I really want to make clear the status quo is unaffordable, and there are options, if done right, that can help bring these costs down over time. Lastly, on the economic piece, is that it's not just a consideration for individual Vermont consumers or homeowners or renters. It's also about the future of our state economy. Because right now, 100% of the fossil fuel that Vermonters use is imported into Vermont. We don't produce any of it. And since it is a commodity product, part of international markets, the vast majority of the money that we spend on it goes out of state, drains out of state to the folks who are providing that fossil fuel, whether it's coming from the Gulf Coast or some country internationally. And only about 25 cents of every dollar that we spend on fossil fuel in Vermont is staying and recirculating in the local economy. Some goes to gas stations, some will go to a fuel delivery truck driver, but most of it is going to pay for that imported fossil fuel and is leaving the state economy. That equation gets reversed when we invest in things, use our energy dollars with local wood heat. Cordwood, that's like 100% of every energy dollar is staying and recirculating locally. Wood pellets, it depends where they come from. But with electricity, on average, that previous ratio gets flipped on its head, and about 71% of every dollar we spend on electricity is staying and recirculating here in the Vermont economy. It's going to pay for line workers, tree trimmers, folks who work at the utilities, local power purchases. And so that can have a really big effect in terms of keeping more money in and growing the Vermont economy, and in terms of helping support the jobs of our neighbors rather than the jobs of people very far away. I think that is basically it for now. So how is that time good? Awesome.
And when it's time for questions, if folks have specific questions, Jared, you're willing to go back to these slides.
Absolutely, and I can turn them off for now if that's
Okay.
good.
Great, thank you. So I thought this was really helpful. For me, it's always important to get some data. What are we talking about that's not just my opinion or what I think is happening? Let's see kind of what's some actual data. Now, you can look at data and come to some different ideas about how to proceed. Sometimes Jared and I don't agree on how to proceed, but it's really important to have that foundation. I appreciate so much the work that you all do to make this really more digestible for folks. And I encourage, if you haven't grabbed one of those in the back, to do so. So I want to talk a little bit about two laws that I have. There's a number of different laws in the state that have been passed on climate action. Two that I have been particularly involved in are the Global Warming Solutions Act, which was passed in 2020, and the Clean Heat Standard, which was passed last 2023. So I want to talk a little bit about what has motivated me in this regard and why I care about this. In 2011, like many of you, I was here, and this region, like many regions in the state, was devastated by Tropical Storm Irene. It was devastated. Some of our communities were so devastated, it was hard to imagine that they would ever be able to recover. And Tropical Storm Irene, I believe, was considered to be a 500-year storm, and now, because of the change, kind of the escalating effects of climate change, I believe it'll be closer to a 100-year or more frequency. You may have better data on it, but things are changing. So the likelihood of seeing storms like that more frequently is increasing. 2015. As Jared noted, the Paris agreements were signed. These are, climate change is not something that one town, one state, one country will be able to resolve on their own. It's something that will have to be addressed globally. The effects will not be felt equally, and especially folks in poverty will feel deeper effects from climate change. And so the Paris Accord was a gathering of a lot of nations and agreements that they made about what can we do together, what are the goals that we're going to set for ourselves. And there are a number of countries that signed on to that, including the US. And in Vermont, in 2017, the US pulled out of the Paris Agreement. In Vermont, our governor, along with a number of other governors across the state, urged President Trump to go back into the Paris Accords because no country will be able to do this on their own. And President Biden did, in fact, rejoin us to the Paris Accords. In 2018, I was contacted by our electric utility. Some of you may have been there. I don't know if Ann was there or Rich was there. We met in Whitingham, a number of elected officials, and the utility wanted to just show us some data. So if you want to know what's happening with the local weather, talk to the utilities because they're the ones that are going out and seeing the damage from the winds, having to get the power back on. And it was really irrefutable, the data that they were showing us. Many more intense storms coming with much more frequency, higher winds, and more water. And the purpose was, does everybody understand that this is happening? It's not something that's coming. This is happening. And these things, made an impression on me. In 2020, there might have been, in 2020 we moved to pass the Global Warming Solutions Act in the legislature. Before we did that, there was an attempt to increase the sales tax on fuel. by 2 cents so we could increase weatherization. And I said, there's no way. I was on the energy committee, and I said to my chair, I'm not voting for it. You have no idea how much weatherization you need to do. How do we know what we're aiming for? How will we know when we're done? How do we know if we have enough money? Like, this isn't a good idea. This is just like a Band-Aid. And so he came back, working with a number of other sponsors in the House, and brought forward this Global Warming Solutions Act. And something similar has been passed in both Massachusetts and Connecticut. And it's a plan. It basically says, you've made these commitments to the Paris Agreement. How are you gonna get done? Let's put together a climate council, which we did. Here, Abby Course from Whitingham was on that climate council. Chris Campany from the Wyndham Regional Commission was on that climate council. Jared was on that climate council. A number of folks, and you still are, yes. And that is staffed and housed at the Agency of Natural Resources. And their job is to come forward with a climate action plan. How can we reach those goals? Why, let me talk a little bit about why I think it's important to have a plan that gets us to those goals. In Vermont, we're a tiny little state. You know, it's really not gonna matter if we reduce our, I know this makes Jared very uncomfortable understanding this. If we reduce our emissions to 0, it's not gonna change global climate change. And so, why do this? Because there's more than 190 signers to the Paris Accords. There are other large countries. There are other large states. And when those states move, when they take actions to reduce their emissions, they change markets. And Vermont is not immune from that at all. And I saw that happen and play out here, a transitioning system with our telecommunications system and with our telephone system, where we saw that really critical infrastructure, the telephone, that system was basically rotting on the poles for lack of investment because it was too expensive to invest in the rural areas and the poor areas. Meanwhile, all kinds of competition, new products, and places where you can make a lot of money. And so that was because we could not make companies come and cover the poor and rural areas. And so, you know, we did a lot of work in our state to fix that. Ann Manwaring serves on our CED. Thank you very much, Ann. My husband is here, serves on our CED. Thank you very much for the work you all are doing in that regard. But I bring that up because I learned something here. When we don't plan for our rural and poor areas, when we leave our rural and poor areas on their own in these big shifts and big transitions, and the energy transition is a global transition, doing nothing, the status quo, those are the people who will feel the greatest effect. Those are the people who are going to be looking around and saying, where's the gas station? You know, Rich will probably still be around, but you know, if you're in Reedsboro or Stanford, you know, and that's the only one for 40 miles, you know, that might be an issue. You know, who am I calling for my propane? You know, is it somebody in Delaware? You know, like how am I getting customer service? And so, how can we get some more thoughtfulness into these processes? So those are really the big motivators for me in terms of these policies. Thinking about how can we plan, and if we don't plan, we are planning to leave rural and poor Vermonters behind. Those are the people that I represent. So to give you a little more on, I think we went through the Global Warming Solutions Act. It sets legally binding targets, as Jared said. The legally binding targets are for emissions reduction. Why did we set those? Because that's what the Paris Accords were. I can tell you, as we're gathering information, going into the next legislative sessions, you know, we may look at that and say, okay, we set our goal the same as all of these other countries, which was appropriate, and now we're getting a lot of information that may tell us, like, what's actually possible. We don't know yet, you know, and I think Chair McNamara will talk a little bit about just the process of the he's going to give us a lot of information in January, and we'll have to consider that. So, in addition, it gives us, I should look at my notes, I'm going to get lost, I know this without looking at my notes. In addition, it gave, they were legally binding targets. So what does that mean? That means that any Vermonter, anybody, can sue if we miss those targets. What we did was narrowed this so that the only cause of action you would have is, did the Agency of Natural Resources put forward a plan to meet the goals, and are we making progress with that plan? And if we're not, you've got to give them notice, they've got to be able to talk about it, and then we have to think about what's reasonable. So you can't sue for damages. That's part of, there's a lot of misinformation that's out there. I've heard people getting really upset about, the fact that we can sue for damages. You cannot sue for damages. We're intentional about that. So that's what the Global Warming Solutions Act. Climate Council plan, legally binding targets. That plan gets reviewed and reported on. So one of the biggest aspects of the Global Warming Solutions Act and of the Climate Action Plan, so as Jared said, we've got thermal and transportation. Those are the two biggest sectors that are emitting greenhouse gas emissions. So those are the two biggest places for us to focus. And in the first Climate Action Plan was this thing called the Clean Heat Standard. Clean Heat Standard is what is called a performance standard. So we have a performance standard in Vermont right now on our electric sector. It's the renewable energy standard. And you basically give the utilities a goal. You've got to reduce your fossil fuel, electric sources by X amount, and if you don't, you have to offset that with some funds, and we're going to use that to help weatherize people's homes or reduce their fossil fuel usage. So the Clean Heat Standard conceptually is if you're a fossil fuel seller in the state of Vermont, how much fossil fuel are you selling? Based on how much you're selling, here's your obligation in terms of what you're going to be required to help your customers reduce their greenhouse gas fossil fuel usage. So those are clean heat measures. A clean heat measure could be weatherization. It could be biofuels, which are lower emitting. It could be moving to advanced with heat or other things that reduce emissions. Okay, so you don't have to provide those if you're a fossil fuel seller. You can pay compliance, an alternative compliance payment, and then someone else can bring in clean heat measures. Those clean heat measures are heavily targeted towards lower and moderate income folks. So that's conceptually what the Clean Heat Standard does. The way that the bill passed, usually when you pass a bill like this, we would then say, okay, PUC, Mr. Chair, you have all the technical experts, you figure out how to do this, and then you write the rules, you bring it to this small group, LCAR, it's a small group of legislators and others, and then it's implemented. And the governor, I think wisely, said, y'all should have to vote on that. Like, you don't know, there's a lot you don't know, it's very complicated, this would be very expensive. It needs to come back, and you all need to vote on it. We said, okay. We still vetoed it, but it's coming, it will come back to us, and it may not get enacted. It may get enacted, it may be changed significantly before it's enacted. So we passed a bill that said, okay, PUC, we want you to gather technical experts, we want you to gather equity experts, and then we also want you to do this thing called a potential study. Are you going to talk about a potential study?
That's the Department of Public Service.
You are not going to talk about that. So it's a study that then will go to the PUC, is going to the PUC, that measures what's possible. So this is where we start getting some of the reality in here. So what do we have for workforce? What is it going to take to actually literally reduce the emissions by this much? How many heat pumps? Is it possible to do that? What would the cost be? And so all of that information the chair is going to be gathering from the PUC, from the equity advisory groups that PUC is gathering, and sending into the legislature with rules and say, okay, you told us to meet the Global Warming Solutions Act, to do it with these inputs, here's how you could do it. It may be very expensive, what comes to us. And then it may be a lot of work, if that's the case. So I'm gonna just check and see technically if there are any gross errors that I made that need to be corrected immediately. Any gross errors, okay. So that at a very high level are the two big bills that we have pushed forward. So this will be another year that we're looking forward, forward to working on this policy. And this is hard. This is difficult stuff. And the alternative, some folks will say, just put a tax on and do the weatherization, right? Okay, how do we know? Like, how? I really want us to do something that is systemic, that makes sure that we're not missing the rural people, the poor people. We may not have it right. We may have a lot of work to do still in front of us. And so that's why it's really important for you all to be informed, engaged. Thank you very much again for coming. And with that, good.
Almost perfect.
Oh, it sounds perfect.
Great.
Mr. Chair.
So I just want to say, every time somebody says Mr. Chair, it just means that I'm the head nerd at the Public Utility Commission. There's a bunch of us, I'm not the only one. We're 3 commissioners. I don't do anything unilaterally. We're a separate independent agency. We're separate from the administration. I'm appointed by the governor, but the Senate has to confirm me, and I have to follow whatever law the legislature tells me to enact. We're essentially, we figure out the nerdy technical details. That's what we do. Rich said earlier, we regulate the electric sector. So Green Mountain Power, when their rates go up, you can blame us because they came to us and we need a rate increase. We looked at it and said yes, no, that kind of thing. Consolidation, merger, blame us for that too. We look at those. Some issues are regulated by the federal level and we cover only a little bit. Some telecommunications, but for the most part, in the state, for a long time, over 100 years, we've regulated the electric utilities in Vermont. Clean heat standard is interesting because we've touched on thermal off and on for the last 20 years or so. We're not experts in it. We're getting expertise. We're learning. We're good at regulating things. We're good at understanding how something technical works, how a company works, and saying you need to do X, Y, and Z, file this report, here's what the costs are going to be, here's what the benefits are going to be. That's why the legislature told us, here's a clean heat standard, here's an outline, you guys go fill it in. So that's what we're doing now. Let's see, sorry. And also assuming that the legislature decides a clean heat standard is going to go into place, we're the ones who have to implement it. We're the ones who are going to say, all the fuel dealers or anybody bringing fossil fuel, heating fuel into Vermont, here's your obligation. We're going to be the ones responsible for the costs at the end of the day. We're going to tell people how much they have to do. So, there's a lot of technical issues we're trying to sort out. Representative Sibilia talked about clean heat measures. The way I think about it, in very simple terms, if you put in a cold climate heat pump into your house, we have to sort out, and we have a lot of other expert folks helping us with this. One heat pump equals X amount of greenhouse gas reductions. One house weatherized equals X amount, biofuels, all that. So we're trying to sort that out, trying to understand it. We have a head start. Other states have done something similar. You have to make it unique to Vermont, our climate, our economy, other aspects. So we're trying to understand that. That's just one example of what we're doing. And then we have to actually set up the individual process of when somebody installs a heat pump, how does that then turn into a clean heat credit that then this obligated party, this person importing fossil fuel heating into Vermont, can then buy, sell, retire. So we're setting up an entire trading system around clean heat credits. Again, we can look to renewable energy standard, we can look to other mechanisms to do it, but it's not just grabbing something off the shelf and saying, here you go. It's, and there's no one single right way of doing it. We're going to propose, here's what we think you ought to do, and then the legislature might say, thank you very much, we're going to do this instead. And that's fine. Our job is to make a proposal of what we think actually makes sense. Doesn't mean that we're going to, I can tell you I've made, I don't know how many mistakes in my life, and I will continue to make mistakes. And we just try to use our best judgment and try to really think about benefits, consequences, costs, try to be as explicit and transparent as we can with folks about this is the benefit you're getting, here's the cost that you're getting as well to get that benefit. So, another really important thing that, and by the way, I'm not going to dive into the details of how you create the clean heat credit. I'm not going to figure out how you calculate greenhouse gas emissions from the heat pump. One, because I have smarter people than me in my office that are working at it, and I'll probably screw it up. So, but it's also, it's in the weeds. This is really important about how do you want to regulate the heating sector? What makes sense? And making sure that we're showing you, here's the benefits, here's the costs, here's how we're proposing to do it given the legislation. But one other really important consideration, Act 18 that was voted on in 2023 was called the Affordable Heat Act. And the idea behind it is a certain portion of the benefits has to flow to customers with low and moderate income. Total 32% of the benefits should be flowing to those folks. And we have a responsibility to consider front loading that. Should you actually have 100% of the benefits in the first 5 years for customers with low and moderate income? And that's an important and also a tricky issue because to incentivize to get somebody to switch to a heat pump, you need to give them incentives. You should give them money. And as Jared was talking about, with customers with low income, they're already paying. They don't have excess money that they can just throw at a heat pump. So the incentives you need to give for heat pump for weatherization are a lot higher for customers with low income to move that market. So if you front load these requirements and say we're really going to be focusing on customers with low income, you're increasing the overall cost that at least in an interim period people are paying to do that support. So very high level what we're doing. The next big thing for us, what we're really working on, October 1st, we're going to put out a rule. The rule is effectively just saying every obligated party, everyone who's bringing fossil fuel heating into heating sources into Vermont, here's what you have to do. Here's when you have to register, here's how many credits you have to get, here's who gets those credits. All that kind of work is going to be put out on October 1st. So we're really scrambling to try to do this. I'm really also hoping that we can be as transparent as we can about costs and benefits at that time too, because this discussion really needs to happen holistically. If we just put out a bunch of rules saying, you know, if you're buying heating oil from Claremont, New Hampshire, you're coming in here, you have to do X, Y, and Z, that doesn't help most folks. What we want to be able to say is, what we're proposing is this particular program, and it is going to cost somewhere between X cents per gallon of fuel oil and Y cents per gallon of fuel oil. Whenever you do projections like that, we're always wrong. We just try to be not as wrong as possible, is how I think about it. So you give a range. You say it's going to cost somewhere around here. What I'd also like to do is to be able to say, if you take advantage of this program, if you take advantage of the clean heat standard, you get an incentive to weatherize your house, your fuel bill's going to go down this much. You know, your heating bill's going to go down this much if you do a heat pump, or if you use biofuels, here's what's going to happen. And then also the other important thing is looking 20 years out. What are the cumulative estimate costs and benefits 20 years. It's kind of pie in the sky, so we're going to do the best we can. Put something out, and then we're going to spend about 2 months, between a month and 6 weeks, going out and getting comments on what we put out. And we'll have a better description. We'll be able to tell you exactly, here's what we did. I'll have the folks who can really explain in detail, here's how we calculated it. But we're going to go out and we're going to ask for input. And we want people to provide input. Then we'll revise our rule, update our report that then goes to the legislature January 15th. And the most important piece is the legislature. Whatever we come up with by January doesn't matter until the legislature says, yes, go out and do this. And what we give them, I fully expect that the legislature is going to change. Because again, we're a bunch of nerds, we're going to try to do it right, and we need other folks to actually tell us to implement this. So I would just strongly encourage you to stay engaged on this one. And come October, start looking for, we'll try to communicate as best we can. Here's a draft rule, here's some draft information. Provide us comments, and then importantly, provide comments to your representatives, to your senators. That is where the rubber is going to meet the road in January. It's really important. This is a massive change in the thermal sector. It's something that we need to do to meet the Global Warming Solutions Act, and it's going to have, there's costs and benefits to this. You know, we've talked about the benefits, more stable heating prices, likely to be lower heating bills across the board as you implement different things, depending on your individual house, other things like that. A little disclaimer there. But it's also going to increase your heating costs to some degree as well. We don't know the magnitude of that, and the idea is that those costs are going to be outweighed by the benefits in the long run. That's what I got.
Thank you very much. So we actually finished a little quicker, so why don't we figure on, we'll do the 3 minutes. If you have a question, and your question takes 30 seconds, we'll pause it, we'll get you your answer, and you have a follow-up question. I don't know if there's a lot of people that have comments or questions. If it's just a comment, we just ask that you keep it within the 3 minutes. What I'll do when you have about 30 seconds left, I'll stand up so you know you're kind of getting ready to wind down. Is there anybody who'd like to make a comment or ask a question of one of your panelists here? Go first and second.
So when you evaluate the transportation emission, does that include just Vermonters, or is it everybody that comes to Vermont and is driving?
So the way that Vermont does its greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the way that every state in the country does it, is what's called an in-boundary or territorial inventory. So it's the emissions that come from within the borders of the state of Vermont. And so that includes, so it's primarily the gasoline and diesel. There's rail fuel, there's jet fuel, things like that. But primarily the gasoline and diesel that is sold within the borders of the state of Vermont. So it would not include gasoline and diesel that Vermonters buy when they're out of state, but it would include gasoline and diesel that other people from outside of Vermont buy while they're here.
So that's why I ask, is because, you know, we're a tourist state, obviously. People are coming here, buying gas, and it's a little higher rate than maybe another state that doesn't have a tourist industry, or not as big a tourist industry.
Yeah, it would be a really interesting question about, like, I think what I've heard is that I've heard data from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. They've been able to access like macro level credit card data and looking at the zip codes that are used at different gas stations. And they've estimated that on average about 20% of the gasoline sales in Vermont are purchased by people with out-of-state debit or credit cards.
Only 20%?
That's the figure I remember, somewhere between 20 and 25%. What I've heard is that that's actually very similar to a lot of the other New England states, Maine, a lot of tourism, New Hampshire. So I have a hunch that it would roughly even out, but I think it's a really fair point and a good question for further research. Like, is there an imbalance between the states in terms of the share of in and out of state gasoline purchases? I actually wouldn't be surprised if there's, relative to New Hampshire, you know, because we share such a large border, you know, I know some people oftentimes do, Vermonters oftentimes go to New Hampshire to buy gas, whereas vice versa doesn't really happen as much. You know, it's not something that I can speak confidently to, just have a few data points that I'm aware of.
You all set, Phil?
Yeah.
And
Well, I would like to, Ann Memory, from Wilmington. I would like to better understand the hierarchy of obligation. You used the term obligated party.
That's right.
Well, from what I said, a dealer, I'm a local dealer, comes to my house and puts fuel in my tank. But a giant tanker comes and fills up their depot. And then there's a whole supply chain of various levels above that. So in all of that chain, who is an obligated party? And what does each level of that have to do? And then there's a second part of that. How does what I actually do at my property to help reduce the amount of fossil fuel that I use get into that chain for anybody to use as a credit?
Great, thank you. So the way the statute's written, an obligated party is whoever is importing fossil fuel heating into Vermont. So for example, if there's a large depot up in Franklin County, you know, coming from Quebec, I'm gonna absolutely demolish the names because I don't know the players well enough. But let's say it's global or urban. You know, they bring in massive amounts of fuel oil, hold it in the depot. Individual fuel dealers then go fill up at that depot and then bring the fuel to the house. It's global or Irving in that case who's the obligated party.
Not my local dealer.
Not your local dealer. However, if your local dealer goes over to Claremont, New Hampshire, where there's a fuel depot, fills up there, and they're the ones who bring their oil into Vermont, they're the obligated party. So tracking this is more interesting than some of the kind of projects I've worked on. So who the obligated party is the first person who brings that fossil fuel into Vermont. So around here, I'm guessing it's more likely your fuel dealer. I don't know of any large depots in Vermont around here.
Can I ask a follow-up on the same thing? I'm sorry, those other one. So we're in a part of Vermont that's only 40 miles wide.
Yep.
And we're bordered by 3 states all around us. So it's highly likely that the tankers that are loading up my local dealer probably comes out of Albany.
Yep.
How does that work? Because there's no other choice. How does that work? And is that a problem for us or not? Is it a problem for my dealer as opposed to dealers that are in the parts of Vermont that have geography that isn't going to as likely, anyway, you know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying. It's a question of who has that obligation to do the, to go out and get these clean heat credits. And I do have the second point of your question. We'll get to that. But, so down here, I believe, and if somebody knows better, please correct me, but I believe it's more likely that the fuel dealers down here are going to be obligated parties than somebody up in
The retail dealers. You
the
mean.
retail dealers, thank you, yes, are going to be obligated parties because they're getting their fossil fuel, they're getting the oil from Albany or from Claremont or something else. So they're the ones who have the obligation. I didn't get into a level of detail, Representative Sibilia didn't get into this level of detail. There's something called the default delivery agent in this clean heat standard. And that's essentially a retail fuel dealer can pay somebody who we're going to set up a certain dollar amount and just say, you deal with my obligation, more or less. I'm oversimplifying it, but the short answer is around here is much more likely to be your retail fuel dealer. Your second question, so actually, sorry, let me pause there. Are we good with that, or do you want to explore that?
Well, no, so far we're good for it.
Okay.
I have to mess it around in my head a little bit. Go
Yep.
ahead.
So in terms of, if, for example, you do weatherization in your house, you put in the heat pump, you get biofuel delivered. So we're still working on this, and it's all dependent on what we come up with, comments we get, and what the legislature does. But the overall idea is that is going to translate to, whatever you do is going to translate to a clean heat credit. And you're effectively, when somebody comes in and installs a heat, I'm going to use heat pump because it's easiest. When somebody installs a heat pump in your house, they're going to be providing you an incentive so that they can put in this heat pump. That incentive, by paying you that incentive, you're essentially going to say, you get any clean heat credits associated with this heat pump. You can then sell them to whatever obligated party fuel dealer, anybody else that you want.
So I, as the homeowner, gets the credit, and I sell back to, in our area down here, my local retail dealer. So I sell it to him. What's the financial transaction look like to do that?
So the financial transaction is going to be, because that installer
Who is not my retail dealer.
may or may not be, depends.
Good point.
It does not. I'm more familiar, I live up in central Vermont.
As do most policymakers in the state of Vermont.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely.
Sorry.
No, it's part of why I'm down here. So, it's great. So,
Sorry, Rich.
whoever's putting that heat pump in for you is going to give you an incentive. They're going to say, normally this cost me $15,000 to install, it will cost you $15,000.
That's assuming I meet certain income criteria,
Yeah, I'm just
which I
gonna,
may or may not.
no, I'm just going to say you're loaded. Tonight you're loaded. You have lots of money. Don't worry about income. You're fine.
Become seeing you at tax time.
So that installer, whoever's going to put in that heat pump for you, is going to say, you might not need an incentive, but I want your credit. So I'm going to give you an incentive. I'm going to, instead of $15,000, $12,000, whatever the cost is, I'm going to charge you $10,000.
Okay.
And in return, you're going to take your credit, give that to the installer. That installer then takes it and potentially sells it to the retail heating provider. You know, they could sell it to somebody up in Chittenden County. It doesn't matter. But that's how what you do ends up impacting other folks. And I think this is more about me being quiet.
No, return's over. He has to wait for a second round. Yes, can you just, and I think I missed it, but can you just give us your name and what town you're from?
My name is Jonathan Gannon from Dover. I apologize, I didn't hear the whole discussion, but I heard your part of the discussion. What confuses me is why are we talking about heat being provided by fossil fuels and the discussion about how to make it better when it's never going to get that good? And why are we talking about converting to a non-fossil fuel? Electricity, and making electricity cheaper, okay, more available, okay, both for cars. And I can assure you, can't assure you, right? You're gonna know in 10 years, you're not gonna be able to buy gas cars because the manufacturers aren't gonna manufacture them. Because the rest of the world has already made decisions that these car manufacturers have to abide by, which are going to go electric. So, our daughter had a car dealer, electric car, and she had to go to Mount Snow at the middle of the night to get charged, push. So it's either Mount Snow or the parking lot in Westover, okay? Why isn't the state taking lead in providing charging stations and encouraging people to go electric. I live part-time in New York, but the state of New York has made a law that you can no longer build a house with anything but an electric system. Okay? I mean, that's a big deal in New York, and that includes multiple story dwellings. Okay? So, and secondly, why isn't the state of Vermont encouraging renewable energy? In New York, they're giving it away. And I'm not suggesting that the resources in Vermont are the same as in New York, but there are things that can be done to encourage it. Because you can't get fossil fuels down to nothing in terms of greenhouse gases. And electricity, I understand that there are generators that create greenhouse gases, but electricity, at least locally, is clean. That's all my questions. I'm sorry it took so much time.
No, you actually used all your time but 1 second. But I'm not sure, who would you like to address that to?
I don't know who can address it.
Well,
Maybe-
let me, how about if I start, and these guys are actually the experts, I don't know how much Ed wants to say, and Jared here, but I would say we are trying to move towards reducing fossil fuel usage, and we are trying to do so in a way that allows Vermonters to make choices in a kind of supported market, and something that is not something that is more gradual than, the urgency may suggest we need to be acting, right? So how do we help people, encourage people, create systems that support for heating? So clean heat measures, cold climate heat pumps, weatherization, all sorts of things that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I think that was one of your questions. We are moving in that direction. In terms of, and we are definitely, we just passed an update to our renewable energy standard this year, and increasing the amount, the obligation on our utilities. We have to be careful also, because we know that the increase in electric need is growing at the same time, and we have to make sure we're keeping pace with that on our grid and our generation and all of that. So this is very delicate. This is why it's really good that Vermont has a regulated system that is monitoring all of these things, giving the legislature good advice, which many times they're taking, and maybe not as many times as our regulators would like. Jared.
I would just offer that, so separate from the presentation I gave in my role with Energy Action Network, as Representative Sibilia said, I also serve on the Vermont Climate Council, and was a co-author of the Vermont Climate Action Plan. So I'm pretty familiar with the Clean Heat Standard. And one of the things I would say is I think sometimes those of us who talk about it aren't as clear as we could be. So the obligation to reduce climate pollution is put on the folks who are importing fossil heating fuels into Vermont. But it's not a requirement that they reduce the carbon intensity of their fuel. It's that they overall reduce climate pollution. And they may choose themselves to provide incentives for weatherization, for heat pumps, for wood heat, for biodiesel. Or they may basically pay other people to help Vermonters do that. This gets back to the clean heat. So I just want to be really clear. I'm 100% with you that the solution is not reduce the carbon intensity of fossil fuels. In order to reduce climate pollution and help people save money and get off of that fossil roller coaster, we have to help people move to more sustainable, both environmentally and economically, alternatives. So I just want to be clear, that's what the Clean Heat Standard is designed to do. It's not just to reduce the emissions of the fuel. The other thing that I think is really important in this conversation is sometimes folks will talk about, will this increase the cost of heating? What we really need to do is say, whether or not prices go up or down depends on the choices that you make about how to heat your home or business. If you decide to continue heating with fossil fuels at the same amount that you have historically, then there likely will be upward price pressure on fossil fuel prices because those fossil fuel importers are expected to pass their cost of compliance onto the customers. I will, as an aside, say I did share in the presentation the data about warming winters, which is declining overall fuel use. So there is a possibility that even if there's, the analysis from the only professional organization that's done a comprehensive study of this said potentially a 1 to 2 cent increase per year in fuel oil. That could be offset by lower fuel use because of warming winters and not having to use as much fuel. But the other side of the equation is really important, and that's getting largely ignored in a lot of the public debate. And that is that the prices for the cleaner, less polluting options are going to go down. So in the other states that have done this, Oregon has not done a clean heat standard, but they've done a clean fuels program for transportation fuels. And so what they found was, when they did this, a 5 to 10 cent a gallon increase on diesel. But what that translated to was the price of biodiesel, B100 biodiesel, went down by over $1 a gallon. The price of electricity for EV charging went down. So there's going to be price pressures in both directions. Upward price pressure for polluting fuels, downward price pressure for cleaner fuels. And so you can't talk about just the broad cost of heating. It's the cost of heating depending on what you're heating with now and what choices you make going forward. There's a massive opportunity to reduce heating costs if you take advantage of these incentives, weatherize, move to wood heating, biodiesel, heat pumps, heat pump water heaters. If you continue to use the same amount or more of fossil fuel, yes, I think it's likely that those fossil fuel importers will try to pass their cost of compliance onto you in the form of higher fuel oil prices or propane prices.
He's also.
Okay, so can I have one more thing on this? Just something we haven't talked about, which is so this is an energy transition, right? So the largest fuel sellers already see where the market is going. They are already taking care of their business. They are expanding what their business offerings are, right? So they are becoming weatherizers. They are becoming installers of clean heat pumps. They are adding renewable or biofuels into the mix. So a concern for me, and a concern that we may hear locally, is those smaller people, it may be more challenging for them to envision kind of expanding their business offerings. And so this may feel more like a crunch. And so that's a problem I'm interested in really thinking about as well. So, okay.
Can I just take one minute?
No, sir, look, why don't we wait and see if there's somebody else? You actually took almost all your time. You had 1 second left, so. Is there anybody else? Sir, and your name again?
Yeah, hi, I didn't get to you. My name is John Bravian. I'm with Vermonters for a Clean Environment, and my organization has been challenging a lot of the policy approaches being provided under the Clean Heat Standard. I just want to clarify some things that were said here, and maybe ask a question. I first want to clarify the fact, I first want to ask a question, and maybe you can answer it when I'm done. Why this panel doesn't have the fuel oil dealers represented. So we have a balanced panel. We have Representative Sibilia, who was the lead advocate on this bill in the House. And we had Mr. Duvall, who is a data provider, but was an advocate in both House and Senate on this bill, as were his affiliates, Regulatory Assistance Project, and others who serve on his board. But absent from this conversation are the fuel oil dealers. Had they been here, you would have heard what the cost projections are right now. Mr. Duvall will debate that, and so will Representative Sibilia. But Secretary of the Natural Resources provided a cost estimate. She said it was a back of the envelope, a rough estimate, but the proponents of this bill, time and again, were asked to provide a countervailing estimate that they deemed to be more accurate, and they refused to provide it. Secretary Julie Moore, Secretary of Natural Resources, said it would cost about 70 cents a gallon. Independent of that, and just recently, a draft report was put out by a consulting firm hired by the Department of Public Service. They work for the state, they work for you all. They're your advocate at the Public Utility Commission. And their draft report said it's going to cost in excess of $17 billion over the next 25 years to fund this. The little state of Vermont is going to have to fund this, 650,000 people, $17.3 billion over the next 25 years. And as Chair McNamara said, they're looking at front-loading this. So you're going to see a large share of this cost borne earlier on in this program. That would have been brought up had the fuel oil dealers been here. What also would have been brought up, because I spoke with fuel oil dealers before I came here, was that 6 fuel oil dealers have either gone out of business or sold to larger concerns because they sell fuel. They are not HVAC, plumbing and heating companies. This is not what they do. They can't even get folks to drive their trucks and man their telephones, let alone do this. So they're selling out. There are 2 very large fuel distributors that were full tilt lobbying this legislature to push this thing through. There's one other thing I wanted to correct. Representative Sibilia, let me just close.
We said at the beginning, it's 3
Okay.
minutes.
Yep.
So
Let him speak.
we'll get back to them if there's nobody else that wants to speak. There may be other people that want to speak.
No, it's fine. Thank you.
We've got about 8 minutes left, okay? So is there anybody else that would like to say anything? Maybe you want to sell them your speaking credits.
And I do have more to
I'll give
say,
you mine.
just to provide you the rest of the
You've
record.
already used yours up too. I just want to make sure if there's anybody else that has any comments, that they get a chance to speak. Is there anybody else that wants to speak? If not, we'll go back to the gentleman with the hat, and then we'll go back to John.
Do I get to answer this question? I guess.
Yeah. Do you want to answer it first?
Well, is there anybody else?
Well, I didn't know if you want to hear the rest of his.
I was cut up, and then Representative Sibilia can correct me if I'm wrong on the last statement I wanted to make.
Okay, so if there's nobody else, sir, you'll go after him, okay? We'll give you another 3 minutes.
Okay. So Representative Sibilia said that we, the legislature, in the final act, the Clean Heat Standard, what they call the Affordable Heat Act, we would disagree with that. We provided in the law, the bill that became law, overriding Governor Scott's veto, a check back. Just so you know the order of events, we happened at the end. Representative Sibilia advocated for the initial format of the bill, which had no check back, 0 check back. That passed the House, went over to Senate, and thank God for Senator Jane Kitchel, who's chair of Senate Appropriations. She did listen to concerns raised about the costs. She got no numbers, nor did any of the House members have any numbers other than what were provided by Julie Moore, Secretary of A&R. But they passed the bill regardless. We'll figure it out later. Senator Kitchel said, no, we need to have a check back. She actually met with the governor. She mentioned that in committee, the committee she chaired, and that in conference, or I guess the House just agreed to the Senate version of the bill. So there was no we in the original. Representative Sibilia supported the bill in the end, yes, but had she had her way initially, there would have been no check back. And the opportunity to not implement this once they get the costs figured out would not have been there. And I just want to say in closing, as Chair McNamara said, most of the fuel oil dealers will be bringing the fuel in from out of state. They will have to pay this fee. There's also a debate as to who will own those credits. You asked about that. There's a program, Efficiency Vermont, we've all heard about it. They give you $50 back on a refrigerator or whatever, a furnace, they give you money, wood stoves. There's a debate as to who will own those credits. And if a fuel oil dealer comes and says, or I'm sorry, a plumbing heating contractor comes and says, I'm going to put a new electric apparatus heating system in, and here's an incentive provided by Efficiency Vermont. Efficiency Vermont is saying they own those credits, and then they're going to be able to sell them back to fuel oil dealers. In the end, there's so much in flux. they don't know as much as they claim. Mr. McNamara has been the clearest on all this. In sum, I think what we need to be looking at is the cost benefit. We've heard about that, it's what we do. The cost benefit, and I say the cost benefit. What's the cost of Vermonters vis-a-vis what are we going to get back? We've been told by Representative Sibilia tonight that they'll have zero benefit to Vermonters in terms of remediating climate change, which I think, by the way, is 10 times worse than people are admitting.
Sir, you got 6 minutes.
And
So,
I'm almost done.
No, that's it. You have 6
Okay.
minutes.
Let him speak.
Jim, if you want like to use some
I'll
time.
give- I'll give 3
Jim, we
minutes.
got like 3 minutes left.
I'll give you my 3 minutes.
Okay, well, you don't get them yet. Laura gets to answer.
Yeah, Laura
the
needs to
question,
answer.
And then we'll go forward, okay? But we're running out of time too. Some folks have a 2-hour drive, so we gotta be respectful of their time also.
So, why weren't the fuel dealers invited tonight? Because I wanted to provide accurate information and not speculation. I have gone and spoken with the fuel dealers. I was invited to go to Manchester, I think a month and a half ago, to talk with them about this. I talked to their representative probably close to weekly, to check in about the status of the market, what are the challenges, and so there you have it. They're quite welcome to be here, John. I don't know how far you came to make your case known to them.
3.5
but-
hours.
Yep, so, any fuel dealer was welcome to come to this. I have a lot of respect for Secretary Moore, who is an appointed position. She runs a very large agency. I think this is an incredibly complicated policy. I think it's very important that we all know what the prices are, what the costs are. Very important, which is why all of this work will help us get to a much better understanding of what the prices will be. I'm going to say that I think what Secretary Moore did in terms of literally a back of the napkin estimate of cost before we've done any of the technical work, the potential study, all of this, I think it was irresponsible, and I think it was political. And it does not make me happy to say that, because I have to work with her all the time, and she's a very smart lady, and she's great to work with. John talked about the draft report that has just come out. This is the stuff that is really driving me crazy. This is very, very hard. The reason that we have this event today is just to put some base facts on the ground. We've got literally data, and then we've got literally the regulator, like not a lot of opinions or political speak here, just me, and you can take it out on me all you want, but let's get some just baseline information in here. This potential study that is coming out, that came out, the draft that John was referencing, it came out to get some feedback from others. It was a draft. My guess is, having spoken with some of the folks engaged in that there's going to be some changes to it. Let's say it comes in. Let's say it comes in and it is $17 billion. I think the legislature will probably pay attention to that and wonder if that's a good idea. So then I would say that's good information for us to have. And then, is there anything else I want to say? In terms of the fuel dealers that are selling out, I think all of our businesses are under a lot of stress for workforce issues, and this is exactly something that I'm worried about happening. Yeah, I'm sitting.
Is it, do I have time?
Yeah, we'll let you go, and then we'll be about 7:30. If anybody can stay for a couple extra minutes, if we have another, I think I promised the gentleman out in front of Jim, and then I'll give Ann a shot. No, but hang on. Go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things that you said, John, that I really agree with is that we need to have this conversation in a full way about costs and benefits, both costs and benefits. And the reason that it's been so hard to come by estimates is that many monitors, people who would look at that question, say you cannot answer that question until the basic decisions have been made about how this is going to function. I don't think it's possible to come to an accurate estimate of costs and benefits, of price effects, until there are draft rules ready that set the basic information from which you then model things. So that's number one. That's the responsible approach. I know it can be anxiety inducing to say, like, let's wait, but we have to make sure that we do accurate, honest projections and analysis. The other thing I would say on that is that you mentioned the potential study, John, and you said it was important to talk about both costs and benefits. You only talked about the cost number, and that number is...
I tried to talk about benefits and cut
Sir,
off,
hang on.
just to be clear.
We didn't interrupt you, okay?
Okay.
So that study, they said, this is preliminary, we want to get feedback on the inputs and assumptions. These numbers are not for circulation, we think they're going to change. It hasn't stopped people from taking that number and sharing it, or those numbers. In addition to the $17 billion in projected costs, they also said, we project almost $21 billion in benefits in terms of energy savings and avoided costs and harms. And the net effect of that is over $3 billion in benefits to Vermont. Now, I totally agree with Chair McNamara that when you're doing these projections out 30 years, it's more responsible to do a range than to focus on a specific number. But we have to look at both sides of the equation, and on one side of the equation, both the costs and the benefits, not just one or the other. And I will say, it has been talked about, the Secretary's back of the envelope number, which had serious errors and problems with it. It's been talked about the cost estimate in this potential study that we know is going to be revised. The one thing that hasn't been talked about is the one in-depth professional study that was contracted by the Agency of Natural Resources, a group called Energy Futures Group, did modeling not specifically of the clean heat standard, but of the scale of change that we're talking about to reduce pollution from our heating sector. And what they estimated was a 1 to 2 cent per gallon per year price effect on fuel oil. 1 to 2 cent a gallon per year for fuel oil. And they also estimated price decreases on the cleaner fuels, like electricity, like biofuels, like wood, that you would also have available to you. So I just want to say, let's have a holistic, full, honest conversation. Talk about the whole thing, not just one piece of the equation.
Jim, you haven't got to ask a question. I'm not going to let you sell your credits because you have to pay me, not just...
I don't have your money, Rich.
Well, I wish I had half of what you had. I'd be able to afford to live in Vermont. But do you have a question or comment you would like to make?
I'd like to make one comment.
Okay,
There's all
go
this
ahead.
electric talk between cars and your clean heat pumps and all this other stuff, wonderful things. How come nobody's talking about nuclear? Okay, there's the elephant in the room. You need to give it a big hug and a kiss. It's time to move forward with that. All these solar panels, they got a lifespan. Pretty soon we're gonna have junkyards full of that stuff. The windmills, the blades are gonna fail. There are going to be junkyards full of that. There's no recycling that stuff. Time to start thinking about other things. And it's not just carbon that's causing this climate change. There's weather patterns. There's a big volcano blows up somewhere. That can affect the weather patterns for a couple of years. Look it up. It's true. So banking everything on your little fuel oil dealer thing is just insanity. You're going to break the poor people. And I yield the rest of the time to that gentleman over there.
We're not going to do that. You all set, Jim? Are you all set?
Yeah.
Okay. So, sir, I told you you could go again. Who? Lady in the back.
I'm sorry, I just have one.
No, okay, because you haven't had a chance yet, and then I'll just give these last two. Yes, it is 7, after
Yeah, I'll make
7:30,
it
these guys have a long.
Just after listening to everything. Susan Shuck from New Thing. So I hear things, obviously a very complicated process. So why are we, I guess the whole mandate in the law about being able, if we don't hit certain benchmarks, that we can possibly have lawsuits taken against us. Why was that even put in there? It seems like we need a lot more time to think about stuff. Why set ourselves up for that? Even if it may be hard to sue, why even put that in the picture if this is such a convoluted, difficult process to figure out? and we need the time, why set ourselves up for not making benchmarks and having us catch us, which is going to cost more money?
So, yeah, so when those types of provisions are put into bills, they're put in there for accountability reasons, to keep the legislature and the administration honest. So you pass a policy, are you going to move forward with the policy? That's very simple, that type of provision is put
Suing
into.
is, that's
It's-
a typical,
So you can, I've threatened to sue the Secretary of Education for enforcement of the law, and potentially at standing in that case. What this did is it gave everyone standing, but it narrowed what you can sue for. You can't sue for damages. You can sue, you can say, you have to give notice, and you can say, if you haven't issued a plan, you can sue to have the plan issued. If you're not making progress, you can go in and say, why aren't you making progress? And it could be, this potential study will be really helpful. Maybe we're just going as fast as we can.
so does that delay the progress then? Because if someone wants to come in and cause that argument, does that then delay the work that you're trying to do? Because now you've got to talk to this person, you have to prove your point, so that it takes time and man hours away from what you're trying to solve. So assuming, I don't know, I think
It's a fair
it's
question.
a difficult thing, I
Yes.
think we need a lot of time to do it.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we would set ourselves up to have people really maybe get us.
Fair question. Been asked by a lot of people.
You all set?
Yeah.
Thank you. There's something beeping. Does somebody, you guys hear that?
I think it's a bird.
Is it a bird? Bird's really happy we're having a conversation. Yeah, so, listen,
I will stay.
I just want to ask, we have gentlemen that, like you said, drove a couple hours. Ed hasn't had a whole lot of interaction or questions, or are we, do you guys need to take off, or are you guys good for a couple? Yeah.
I'm fine.
Okay. Yeah, let's do this. So I did say that, sir, you could go, and then we'll call it a night. It'll be 7:45 by then. So, sir, go ahead. If you'd like to start again, you've got the floor for 3 minutes.
I will be as brief as possible. I appreciate all that you're doing. I appreciate that you're trying to say, change things so that we have less carbon dioxide, we have a contamination in our atmosphere and change in the weather. The problem that I'm really concerned about is it's too slow. It's not going to happen fast enough. The world weather is changing faster than we ever participated. We may be on the tipping point, and your people discussing things that will take years and years. And they don't deal with what I consider the biggest problem that the state has, which is the flooding. And you're going to see more flooding because that's where we're headed, okay? And if the weather gets warmer in the winter, so we're not paying so much fuel, it's going to bring in more flooding because you're going to have rainstorms instead of snowstorms. So my reason I wanted to bring this all up is I think Vermont has to act more decisively and faster.
Thank you, sir. And, sir.
Well, I'm kind of changing why I actually raised my hand based on what you said. But my sense on all of this is, quite apart from the individual pieces that you folks are talking about here today, is that we're 40 years behind the ball. We should have started this process 40 years ago. But we've had a political process in this country that has been hell-bent on creating, from stopping any changes to their ability to make the very last dollar they can by selling oil in this country and around the world. So I think we need to clearly understand that we do have to move as fast as we possibly can, because it is here now. It isn't something that's coming out there. And we're all going to have to pay more money for it. The little guys, the medium-sized guys, and the big guys. We're all going to have to take money out of our pockets to fix this problem.
Yeah, so I'd like to just thank everybody. I think, you know, although we all don't agree, we've seen both sides of the spectrum. I think it was very respectful, and we appreciate that. We appreciate the gentleman who didn't have to come here and drove a couple hours. And I'd like to thank Laura Sibilia for setting this up. Laura will stick around for a little bit longer if you want to go a couple more rounds with her. She's ready to do it. But I'd like to thank you folks that drove a long way. Remember, at the bottom of the agenda, there is a contact emails for both their organizations and for Laura, so if you need to contact them, you can. And again, I think it was very respectful. I think you all did a great job. Thank you for coming out. I wish there were more people here to hear everything, but
Thank you, Rich. Thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming out. This is a beautiful night. Appreciate everyone paying attention to this.
Thank you, really glad to be here with you.
and Paul, I think your phone number or your email.
Hey Penny, good to see you. Mwah. So, yeah, I'm Harry. So, nice to meet you. Sure enough,
Yeah, is that with electric baseboard? Yeah. It's a little different than the emails, but, yes, I remember years ago, probably a teenager, everybody switch over to electric. Market economics, I'm not really genius. When you have millions of lives. Very good.
I don't think, I have her phone number, just a team.
Oh, no, that's fine. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely right.